What separates a good photographer from a great photographer has absolutely nothing to do with your pictures. I wish it did have everything to do with your pictures, but it simply doesn't. You have to remember that a bride that's booking you is not an educated client. She's never hired a photographer before, and she may never hire a photographer again. It's not like if you were a commercial photographer and you have an art buyer that's worked with hundreds of other photographers and they know all about high-end photography and they know all about trends and all this stuff. Now all this girl knows is that I like the pictures. When I see them, they make me happy, and now I want to meet you and see that you are a normal person. That's what this meeting is all about to me. So when I first started out as a wedding photographer, I really wasn't a wedding photographer at all. I was just a guy with a camera. And so I didn't really have to deal with meeting with clients, because when you first start out shooting weddings, in most cases, it's going to be your friends. Your friends are having a cheap wedding. They just want somebody with a camera there. They don't really care about wedding photography too much. And so your friends are gonna say, hey, will you shoot my wedding for a ridiculously low price? And eventually you're gonna say, sure, I'll help you out. That's kind of how I got into wedding photography to begin with. And I eventually moved to Charleston, and friends told friends about me, and eventually I started to have to meet with these people in person. And once I realized that yes, I did want to become a wedding photographer, and I started charging a little bit more money, I realized that it was really important when I met with people, because it would kind of determine whether or not I booked the job and could pay the bills this month. So meeting with people became something that I became kind of obsessed with, and I've tried everything in terms of meeting with people in different locations, buying them gifts or food or drinks, changing completely the way that I dressed, from like a black suit and tie to completely casual shorts and a t-shirt. And I think I figured out what worked best for me, and I'll be happy to tell you that. But I think the most important thing to realize is that you have to do what works best for you. And you can listen to what Patrick and I have to say and what works well for us, but it's really going to come down to trial and error, and you going out and meeting with your own clients and trying different things and seeing what works best for them. And you'll know, because you'll have that one meeting that at the end of the meeting you'll say to yourself, man, there's no doubt that they're going to book me. That went so well. And then the goal is to recreate that over and over again, so that you can go into any situation with a stranger, and by the end of that 30-minute conversation, hopefully they're gonna love you and they're gonna say, I don't care who we've met with, that guy or that girl was the best. I definitely want them to shoot our wedding. So when I first moved to Charleston and I first started getting into wedding photography, I met at the location that most wedding photographers meet at, and that's Starbucks. And for my price point, I think I was around $1,000 to $2,000 a wedding at that point. I think that was fine. And the nice thing about Starbucks is you know what's on the menu, so you can get yourself a drink, you can get the client a drink very, very easily, and there's Starbucks everywhere. So no matter where my clients wanted to meet, I could meet them at their nearest Starbucks. So it was a nice gesture that I could show, yes, I'm happy to come meet you wherever is convenient for you. And Starbucks, of course, is always open, so that was never a problem at all.
When I first started my wedding business, my prices were not super cheap, but they also weren't at the highest tier either. So when I met with my clients, I wanted to meet with them in a location that wasn't offensive to them, but at the same time, it also had to match the expectations that they had for their price point. So instead of meeting at a generic location, maybe like a Starbucks or some chain restaurant, I decided to meet with my clients at places that were unique to Charleston. And so through email, I would find out if they preferred to have coffee or maybe they wanted cocktails, and then I would suggest a highly regarded spot that was super easy to meet at and also quiet enough to carry on a conversation without having waiters and people really bothering us. By meeting at a cool location, we instantly had something to talk about that wasn't photo related at all. They hadn't been to a lot of these buildings, and it started to feel like my home because I always went there, which kind of gave the upper advantage to me. I think it's really important to have one or two places that you meet at a lot, because not only will you feel more comfortable there, but you'll start to know the waiting staff, you'll start to know the people that actually work there, and it's so nice when they recognize you because it makes your client feel like they really can trust you as well. So go ahead and pick one or two places and stick with those, and that way you're not running all around town trying to meet people at places that you've never been to.
Once I started to raise my prices significantly and I became one of the more expensive wedding photographers in town, I seriously considered renting a place in downtown Charleston simply to meet with clients. And I started looking at locations. I started to figure out how much rent would be on a small room downtown on King Street. That's our most famous street in town. And I thought, man, if I could deck this out with a beautiful furniture and put prints all around the walls and everything, and then maybe have a cappuccino machine and have wine and stuff, I could really impress people. But what I ended up realizing was that I don't meet with that many people to begin with. I shoot a lot of weddings out of state, and I shoot a lot of weddings for people that live out of state but are getting married here in Charleston. And in many cases, I'm not even meeting them before the day of the wedding. I look back at my books and I try to figure out how many of my clients I actually meet with, and I found that I'm only meeting with about 50% of the people that book me before their wedding day. And that's different for a lot of wedding photographers, but I think it's pretty common for people here in Charleston, South Carolina, because we have so many people flying in to have a destination wedding here. At that point, I realized it definitely was not worth spending $1,000, $2,000 a month to have this room, when in many cases 3 or 4 months would go by and I would never meet with a person. I would, respond to email, I'd talk to people on the phone, but I would not have to meet with anybody in person. And I just realized it was going to cost way too much money for me to try to book either a studio or some sort of room that I could meet with people. So after that, I decided I was going to look around downtown Charleston and find a nice location that was still impressive to people. It was a lot nicer than your average Starbucks. And what I decided on was the Charleston Place Hotel. There's a bar inside called the Thoroughbred Club. They have really fancy coffee and wine and drinks and a little snack food and tea, fancy tea. And I could get there early, ask the clients ahead of time what they wanted to eat or drink, have it ready when they sat down, everything would be there, and we could just start out the meeting in a really nice location that kind of was all about Charleston already. So it's not just your standard Starbucks that everybody's seen before. This is a really cool location that they might want to visit even if they weren't meeting me.
A lot of times I'll actually show up to the meeting a little bit early. First of all, because it's easier for them to notice me with a wedding album than it is for me to try to pick out a couple and figure out if they are my potential clients. But I also like to get there early, and in case there is a server, I can go ahead and give my card to them and I can pick up the tab, which goes a long way when they realize that you've made the first investment in them. And that's totally a business write-off, and at the same time, it's not that much of an expense. So it's just a really classy act to show up early, get prepared, and to go ahead and take care of the tab before anyone shows up.
When I first moved to Charleston and I was meeting all my clients at Starbucks, I was really into the psychology of what makes somebody want to book me? Why would somebody like me? Why would I turn somebody else off? And a lot of that was, in my mind, the way that I was dressing. So I tried tons of different things. I showed up many times in a full suit just to see the way people kind of responded to the way that I was dressing. And then I went really casual. I've ended up somewhere in the middle. I usually wear jeans and a nice shirt. Sometimes I'll wear tennis shoes. Sometimes I'll even wear flip-flops. But a nice shirt I think is important. But I found that wearing a suit was actually overkill, and it made it appear like I was trying too hard. It's like, if you went to go buy a cheap used car and the car dealer's wearing like a tuxedo or something, you just go, something's not right here. It's not like you're selling me a Lamborghini. I'm just trying to get a $5,000 car here. Something just seems like you're trying way too hard. And I got that vibe from clients as well. Instead of them connecting with me as an equal, now all of a sudden we're in this really stuffy professional relationship where they're, acting like I'm in some sort of job interview. When I first started shooting weddings, I didn't have an album. I have never been interested in wedding albums. I've always hated making wedding albums. And so there was a good year or two where I was shooting weddings professionally and I had never made an album before. And I would show up to meetings with some prints. Sometimes I had some matted prints. And I know I lost a few weddings because of that. And what I want to make really apparent to you guys is that you don't have to actually make albums to book people, but in many cases you do need an album just to show them that you're capable of doing it. It's kind of a proof that you are a professional photographer and not just somebody with a camera. You can make your first album digitally these days, online, really, really easily. I did my first album, I bought the stock book off of eBay. I made all the prints myself on a printer at home. I put them in there, taped them down, and I actually still have that book, and I show people that book from time to time, and it's fine. But you have to have at least one book, in my opinion, to give your clients the confidence to say like, okay, he really is a professional wedding photographer and I trust him, even if they're not interested in a wedding album at all. When you're first getting started, you're probably not going to have that one perfect wedding where, you know, you have the most beautiful album ever and that can be your stock book for, you know, the next 5 or 10 years. Chances are you're gonna have a lot of great shots, but they're gonna be spread out over 10 or 20 weddings. I would suggest taking those 10 or 20 weddings and compiling them into one best of book. And this is what I always told people. I would say, I made this album to show you what your wedding could look like in many different situations. So if you're getting married in a church, I have 3 different weddings in this book where you can see pictures of people getting married in a church. But if you're getting married at a plantation, I've got 3 different examples of that in the book as well. So instead of spinning it like, well, I don't really have that one perfect wedding where I'm proud of every single image, you spin it that I did this for you so that you can see as many possible examples of my work so that you can get a good idea of what your wedding pictures might look like. That worked really well for a long time until I shot that one perfect wedding that I thought, yes, finally this can be my perfect wedding album that is just one couple.
From my experience, selling myself more as a friend rather than as some kind of vendor has always made my booking percentage a little bit better than when I go in as a salesperson. And therefore, I try to go really light. I usually bring one album, and a lot of times I'll supplement that with maybe an iPad that has a couple photo galleries. And I usually divide those into unique categories like receptions, ceremonies, pose photos, maybe photo booth, and getting ready images. This allows me to show them exactly the images that I think they want to see at the moment without having to go through too many photos. And it's also really nice because they're not overly overwhelmed with a ton of options, tons of books, tons of media. My whole goal is not to really upsell them at this point. It's just to get them talking to feel comfortable with me. And then later on, I can really sell them on the other services that I offer. And in the back of my mind, I always keep reminding myself that my clients have already been to my website. So a lot of these images they've already seen, and I don't necessarily have to show them a ton of my work. They've already decided that I'm good enough to meet with. So I try really hard not to focus too much on images because they've already seen that and I feel confident that they're happy with the work that I do. And instead, I can really focus on building a relationship with them. If they ultimately like me as a person, then I'm gonna have a much better chance at actually converting the first most important step, which is booking them in the first place. Once I have them down for a specific date, then I have a lot of time to figure out exactly what services they want at their wedding.
Something else that's really changed from when I first started meeting with clients to today is what I talk about when I meet with them. I remember when I was first getting started, you want to prove yourself that yes, I am capable of shooting a wedding, and yes, I have professional gear, and here's the reasons why you should book me. And what I was doing was really cheapening myself. I was making it look like I was really needy, and I was trying to convince them that I was good enough, where I feel like that completely backfires in the end. Instead, what you should be doing is just becoming friends with them. You need to be so confident about your gear and your pictures, that's not even a big deal to you. I like to compare this to a big rock star. Imagine if you had enough money to book U2 for your wedding. They were gonna play music at your wedding, and you have a meeting with Bono. Do you think Bono's gonna sit down and start telling you how many times he's played live and what instruments his band uses, and that he's going to dress appropriately for your wedding? No, you should be so excited that Bono's even considering playing at your wedding that you should just want to hear stories from Bono. You should want to make a connection with Bono because he's a cool guy, right? And that's the way I want to be portrayed with my clients. I don't want to have to tell them my cameras are 36 megapixels. Who cares about that? If you like my pictures, you like my pictures. My pictures should be completely irrelevant at this point. You've already had a long time to see my pictures. Now let's worry about us, because if we can be friends, then your wedding day is going to be awesome. If I can prove to you that I'm going to make your wedding fun, easygoing, stress-free, that should be all you need to know to want to book me. You know, as wedding photographers, a lot of times we get so sucked up into thinking only as wedding photographers. We forget who our clients are. And the clients are, in most cases, the bride. Sometimes the groom really cares about pictures, but 90% of the time, it's the bride. And 90% of the time, the bride has been to a wedding before where the wedding photographer was terrible. And guess what? It had nothing to do with the pictures. Chances are, she didn't even see the pictures from the wedding. All she knows is how the photographer acted the day of the wedding. If the photographer didn't dress appropriately, or was really awkward, or forced people to take pictures that they didn't want to, or just acted strange in a number of different ways. Her goal, now that she's getting married, is to not book someone like that. And like I said before, if she's already seen your pictures, she likes your pictures. That's the whole reason you're meeting. You don't need to convince her that your pictures are good anymore. Now it's time to convince her that you are going to make her wedding as good as you possibly can. And the truth is, you are going to be with her more than any other vendor. You're going to be with her, you know, the second she starts getting ready all the way until the end of the night. The planner's not going to be there that long. The caterer's not going to be there that long. The band's not going to be there that long. It's just going to be you. And that's why I feel like personality is so important, and you need to really make an impression that way rather than all about your pictures or all about your gear. That stuff really doesn't matter at this point.
Another thing that you're inevitably going to deal with at these meetings is your clients are going to ask you some really tough questions. And there's no real way to completely be prepared for those except to go to a lot of meetings and get used to answering these questions. So a lot of them are going to be questions that can't really be answered, like what happens if you get sick? And the way that I deal with that is just reminding them that every photographer is going to deal with that, and there's really no easy answer except to say that you're well connected, you know, in the photo industry, and you'll have someone kind of cover for you.
You'll find now a lot of clients, when you meet with them, they're going to be reciting questions that they've read out of wedding magazines. And sometimes they're legitimate questions, but sometimes they're really weird. One of them, wedding magazines always are asking brides to see full weddings. And this is a good reason why. It's because they don't want to, accidentally book somebody that's just gotten lucky on a few weddings and gotten a few good shots. They want to see a full wedding. And if you don't feel like you've gotten that perfect wedding yet that's worth a show album, I would suggest getting an iPad and using a video slideshow on the iPad instead. And what that does is it adds music to the pictures, and it's a lot faster. So all of a sudden now you're kind of viewing the entire wedding day rather than getting fixated on one shot that may not be perfect. You can watch this whole thing and go, wow, I feel great, or wow, that made me cry, instead of saying, why don't they have pretty decorations in the background? And you'll find that, you know, things that are important to you as a photographer, in many cases, are completely thrown out the window with the bride. They notice the strangest details. They'll say like, man, her arms look fat in that dress. And you'll go, what? That's the most beautiful image I've ever taken. But I've had to remove images from my portfolio because her arm looks fat in a dress. Or, oh my gosh, what an ugly bouquet. I don't know what a pretty or ugly bouquet is. I'm just a photographer, but apparently a lot of brides hate that bouquet. I gotta pull it out because I don't want a meeting to start going in this opposite direction of like, ugh, I hate her decorations. Why would anybody dress like that on their wedding day? All of a sudden now they're in this bad mood and they're talking about this one person rather than my photography. So you'll find that you don't want people fixated on individual images unless they're absolutely perfect. We're gonna talk in great detail about pricing and negotiating in another chapter, but basically you're just going to need to be really confident. When somebody comes at you and says, hey, I think your prices are way out of line or whatever, you need to be able to say, that's fine, but those are my prices, you know? And you'll be surprised how much people respect that and how much people will all of a sudden change their tune and they'll be able to come up with that money that they didn't have just a second ago. I can recently remember I met with a couple and they were comparing me directly to another photographer in town. They didn't give me the name of the other photographer, but they said, well, this photographer is willing to give us this, 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 and this for that price, and you're only willing to give us this. And I said, well, that sounds like a great deal. If you like their photography just as much as you like mine, I would definitely suggest going with that other photographer. But you know, I'm one of the most expensive photographers in South Carolina at this point. So if you're looking for a good deal, then you know, I'm probably not your guy. And all of a sudden they completely changed. No, we don't want a good deal. We really respect photography. That's really important to us. We don't want a good deal. We want a great photographer. I'm like, okay. And then they ended up booking me. And so you just have to kind of leave it up to them and be completely confident with walking away, because chances are, if that weekend is available, you're going to book it eventually.
So a lot of people ask me if I bring contracts to my initial meetings with my clients, and almost always the answer is no. I simply find that if I have contracts out and I'm trying to deal with packages and figure out taxes and start coming up, you know, with payment plans and that sort of thing, it really just kind of kills the entire mood of the meeting, and that's the last thing I really want to do. All of that can really be taken care of down the road. So I usually tell my clients, once I've kind of given them all the details about what I do as a photographer, that they should email me or give me a call in a few days or in a week. And I act really confident that I'm going to book that date, but because I'm there meeting with them, I would much rather book it with somebody that I've met with. So almost all couples, they realize that wedding vendors, they work on a first come, first served basis. And that allows me to really have the upper hand, because if I book them, great, but there's also a very good chance that I'm going to book somebody else that wants their date as well. So it takes the pressure off me, and it kind of adds the pressure onto them, because now they realize that, you know, in the next few weeks, I could easily be approached by somebody else who wants their date. So I try to keep it very low stress. I don't want to pressure them into booking me, but at the same time, I do give them, you know, a sense of urgency that somebody is going to book that date, and I typically book this many weddings a year, and their date's really popular. So I would encourage you to not come across too needy with contracts and a bunch of things there that's going to pressure them into booking you, but at the same time, give them a little bit of time to think it over and really make them want to book you instead. It's also really important to remember that your time is very valuable, and being in Charleston with a huge destination clientele, I've actually shot a lot of weddings without ever meeting the couple beforehand. I might meet them on the day of the wedding, or if I can, I meet them, you know, a few days before the wedding when they're back in town. But one thing that I've gotten into a few times that's, you know, a little tricky is people will want you to travel far distances just to meet with them. And at that point, there's really no commitment for them to book you. And so you really don't want to get caught in a situation where you're traveling long distances and really investing a lot in a client that might not book you to begin with. So if you can, do as much of the preliminary talks over the phone and really get a feel for what they're looking for, because a lot of times you can pick up on a client who may not really be interested in your work just by talking with them over the phone, and you're not investing a lot of time traveling an hour away to meet with somebody who's not really committed to booking you in the first place.
In many cases during these meetings, multiple people will come. Sometimes it's just the bride, sometimes it's just the bride and groom, but other times other family members will come. It might be a sister, it might be a best friend, it might be parents, it might be grandparents, and you need to be able to kind of run the meeting and have every single person like you for their own separate reason. And you'll find that if it's only about photography, the bride might like your photography, but the mom's gonna hate it. Or if it's all about the albums, the bride's gonna love the album, but the mom's gonna hate it, because trends have changed, and chances are the mom's gonna want some leather-bound matte book, and the bride's gonna want a digital flush mount book. And so if it's all about that, well, you have to choose one or the other, then they're gonna start fighting, and it's not gonna be a good meeting. Instead, talk to each one about what's important to them. And in many cases, the mom's gonna say, well, I want pose pictures, with the grandparents, and I wanna make sure that we get the uncles and aunts in there. And I go, yeah, tell me about the venue that you're getting married at. And they'll say, oh, it's Boone Hall Plantation. I'll go, oh, I know a great place. the last time that I did some shots with the bride, the groom, and the grandparents out by the water. She's gonna go, oh, that's a great idea. I thought we were only gonna be able to do them inside. And I say, no, we can do both if you want. That's fantastic. Then I look to the bride and I say, what's important to you? Chances are she's gonna say, I don't really like the posy pictures. I like the candids. And I go, okay, check out these pictures on my iPad. And I'm flipping through all the candid shots. When I finally get to that one perfect pose shot, I look back to the mom and go, see, here's what we can do at Boone Hall. Chances are I've got a Boone Hall picture on my iPad. And I go, here's the shot I was just talking about. And she goes, oh my gosh, that's so perfect. And now I've said two completely different things that both of them probably would disagree on. But because I'm talking to them both at the same time, they're both very, very happy and excited about my product. In many cases, when the guy shows up, the groom, to one of these meetings, he doesn't really care about photography that much. In many cases, he doesn't care about any of the vendors. He's just kind of there because that's part of the job. But I think it's really important to win him over as well. And in many cases, my photo booth is what does that to the guy. So the girl might be somewhat excited about it, but then I can show it to him and say, hey, do you have any friends from college or anything that like drinking, they like to party? And he goes, yeah, I definitely do. Well, check this out. Here's some shots that I have of a fraternity. And he's like, oh yeah, I was in a fraternity. That looks awesome. All of a sudden, he's excited about that. We can talk about where they're going on the honeymoon. And now I've got every single person at the table really excited to talk to me. Even though they're just hiring me as a photographer, they feel like they're hiring a friend by the end of the meeting. Basically, my goal for every wedding is to simply sell myself as a person, not as a photographer. I want to become this couple's friend. No matter how old or young they are, I want to become their friend so that if I do shoot their wedding, we could be friends after the event. And this does not happen every time. I'm not friends with every single couple that I shoot, like some photographers would have you believe. But that is my goal when I go to a meeting. I really want to, connect with them on a personal level. And I feel like if I can do that, my pictures are good enough. But if they like me more than the other photographer, they're going to book me, even if I cost a little bit more, because I can convince them that my pictures are a little bit better, even if they may not be.
In talking about how to conduct your meetings, Lee and I have really talked about this a lot, but the most important thing is just finding those common threads that are not based on photography at all, and just constantly going back to their families, their lifestyle, where they're from, where they've traveled, because you're gonna find out that if you have something in common with them that another photographer doesn't have in common with them, all of a sudden they're really gonna have an emotional attachment to you. And nothing is better than showing back up to the wedding and having all of these little stories that you can talk to your clients about, because at the end of the day, you're pointing a camera at them, and it can get a little awkward if you don't know your clients well. So make sure you build up that personal connection, really sell yourself, be yourself, and you're gonna find that you start booking clients that really appreciate you for you, and it's gonna make your whole career so much better because of that. So guys, we are down here in downtown Charleston at the Battery Park, and I'm gonna show you a bunch of scenarios that I like to put my couples in when I do my engagement shoots. The whole point of these shoots that Lee and I are gonna do throughout this DVD is to show you some of the technical skills that you can bring onto your own photo shoots. And you may not like everything that we do, but hopefully you can take a lot of the lighting techniques, the posing techniques, and just the general placement techniques and put those into your own photographs so that you can get really great results. So when you start booking your first weddings, you're probably gonna have clients who are going to ask for engagement sessions. And all an engagement session is it's usually just casual pictures of the couple hanging out kind of in that stage when they're dating. They may use these images for their save the date invitations, they may print them out and put them at the wedding reception, and they may use them in the newspaper. So these photos are really important to a lot of couples. So you wanna make sure that you take the best pictures you can of them, and you really wanna focus on them interacting with each other, because that's what's really gonna separate these photos from any other photo they've had taken of themselves. And these are potentially the first photographs that anybody's gonna see of your work. We've already talked a lot about the gear that we use and the gear that I think you should buy when you're just getting started, but just to show what I'm gonna be using on this shoot, I'm actually gonna have two D300Ss. I have this camera fitted with Nikon's Premier 24-70 2.8 lens. I also have the 70-200 2.8 lens. So even though I have two of Nikon's best lenses on these cameras, the whole idea is that you don't need the best camera to shoot really great photos. So again, don't think that you have to go out and buy the best gear. You can really use the tools that you already have to produce really great photographs. So this shot here, a lot of times I'll put couples down in the grass. This is a really nice park, so this shot works really well. But a lot of times I'll see people that will shoot from up above, shooting down. And you can definitely do that, but you'll see the look that this image has here. And it's just kind of a, not such a flattering perspective. I really want to show the whole park. So a lot of times what I will do is get really low to the ground, and sometimes it makes you look a little funny as a photographer, but you can actually bring the background down with them and you can shoot through the grass and it just gives a really cool look. So just remember, as a professional photographer, you need to take every step that you can to make your images look completely different from every other person with a camera. And this is one easy way, is to get really low and shoot wide, or you can get really far away and low and shoot telephoto. The joys of the job, right? So this is the natural shot here with manual settings. I am shooting at 1/60th at 2.8, which I almost always shoot at 2.8. And then the white balance is set to 6200. And it looks really good, but I think we can get this looking just a little bit better with just a slight pop of flash in this photograph. So right now we've added just a little bit of flash in a very small softbox. And on this example, we're using the Einstein. It's set to 128 because it's pretty powerful and we want to just have the slightest pop of light in here. And I'm gonna have the light come down in height just a little bit, so it's just barely above their noses, and it's gonna give really flattering light to the couple only and really separate them from the background. Lauren, can you get just a little bit closer? So a lot of times you may have the light very close in power, and instead of having to yell at your assistant to go up in power or down in power, you can actually have them just step back a little bit or step a little bit closer. So this is really helpful, especially if they're constantly adjusting the light. Sometimes I can just say, hey, move back a little bit or move a little bit closer. And also keep in mind that if you move the light closer to your subjects, it's going to become even softer because the light source is going to appear larger. If you move back, the light source is getting smaller and it's going to start to look more like a bare bulb flash, which is really counterproductive if you have a softbox. So you'll notice with these photographs, Jason and Kristen's heads are getting a little lost in the trees. So what I can actually do if I bring a second assistant, or if I had a light stand, is I can put another light behind them, and that's gonna act as a kicker light. I have this light set to 1/32. It's just a single SB800 in a softbox, and it's really gonna help separate them even more. This may be a little bit of overkill, but if you take the extra time to do this, it's gonna make these images really stand out. Nick, can you get just a little closer? Y'all can flirt more than that, right? Are y'all past the flirting stage? So one thing I just want to show everybody here is I have this light pretty much balanced perfectly with the ambient and then the strobe light. But a lot of photographers might have the tendency to really underexpose the ambient light and use a lot of strobe light. So right now I'm at 1/60th. I'm gonna go all the way up to 2/50th, which is the highest sync speed this camera does. And then I'm gonna take the ISO all the way down to 100. And I'm probably now going to have to readjust my lights, but I'm gonna show you what it looks like to completely strobe my subjects and kill the ambient altogether. And I don't think the shot really looks as good because of that. Lauren, if you can go up 2 stops. And you'll have to go up 2 stops as well. Lauren, come down in height a little bit. And can you come around their face, just like lean it in a little bit? Great, now I'll take a bunch of these. So you can really see with this image that we took here, you know, it's very stroby, it looks very flashy. It has a cool look to it, but we've completely destroyed the whole park. And I think for a lot of photographers, it's very easy for them to go into this realm where they're lighting everything and they're completely ignoring the natural light. So if you can use natural light to your benefit, it's really like having a second or third light. And a lot of times the natural light is going to be the base exposure before you add any light to your photograph. I think a lot of photographers have this misconception that they need the most powerful flash unit or the most expensive studio strobe to produce really good photographs, and that simply just isn't the case. In fact, when you're out here mixing daylight, usually you need just a tiny little bit of flash to really give your subjects that pop, and most of the light is going to come from the natural environment. I'm going to be using basically two setups that I use throughout all of my weddings and engagement shoots. And the first one's really simple. It's a softbox on a monopod, and I'm just using two SB800s, small little speed lights. So this isn't super powerful. Having two units makes it a little stronger, but I find this is really good just to pop in an extra little bit of flash on my subjects, and it's super convenient, super lightweight, and I can give this to my assistants and they can light pretty easily. And the truth be told, you really don't even need two flashes in here. I just have this as a backup in case something happens to the first one, or if I need that one extra stop of power, I do have it here. But the reality is, I probably shoot 70% of the time with just one speed light. The second lighting setup that I use at a lot of weddings is a Paul C. Buff Einstein, and it's again just a small softbox on a monopod. And I use this more at weddings because a lot of times I'm in situations that aren't ideal. Maybe it's really bright. And in that case, it is better to have a little extra power in your studio light. But most of the time on engagement shoots, I just use the SB800s. They're very lightweight and they're a little bit easier to carry around than this thing with a battery pack. But I'm gonna mix both of them into this session so that you guys can see exactly what I do. And maybe you already have lighting equipment or you wanna get a monoblock. This would be a good one to get. So another go-to shot that I do all the time is I usually have the couples hold hands and then walk away from me and then walk right back. It just kind of mixes things up, and it's the least posy thing that you could do with any couple, and it gets them moving and interacting in a way that's just totally different than setting them in a location. So in this particular example, they're really backlit, and I'm going to try to pull this shot off with no lighting at all. For this shot, it's really easy just to get the light perfect with natural light, and then they can just kind of walk in and out of that light, and it's going to look really good. So what I'm going to get them to do is walk straight down, and I'm going to get shots while they're walking to the spot that I have picked out, so I can get some shots from behind and it's just a different angle, and then I'm going to have them turn around and walk back towards me. And because they're backlit, I'm probably going to have to overexpose on the camera, but then in post-processing I can bring some of the black points back in and give a little more contrast if it's a little washed out on the camera. With this type of shot, you're probably going to want to shoot telephoto, and so I'll usually shoot towards 200 millimeters, and then as they walk towards me I can zoom out back to 70 millimeters, and I have a long time to get the perfect shot during that entire transition. And stop there and turn around, but don't walk yet. When you guys walk towards me, a lot of people have the tendency to look down. That never looks good in photographs. So if you guys look past me, if you look at each other, if you look up, you can really look anywhere except down, and then interact with each other as much as you can as you walk slowly towards me. So go ahead and come this way. And stop right there. Can y'all face each other? And you can get in real close there. You can get closer than that, right? So in this particular shot, they're actually now in the shade, but this whole entire sky that's in front of them right now is acting as a huge softbox. It's very soft, the sun's not hitting them directly, but the sun's backlighting the background, which is really giving a lot of cool contrast, a lot of highlights, and it's almost like a two-light setup with no lighting at all. I have a nice softbox in front of them, which is the open sky, and then I have a kicker light behind them, which is the sun actually coming through the trees. So you have to remember as a photographer, if you can look at a scenario, you might actually be able to find light that's very dynamic and acts as 2 or 3 lights on its own. One last thing to remember when you're shooting telephoto is you really want to make sure that your shutter speed is faster than probably 200th of a second, or maybe even 400th of a second, so that you don't get any blur. And what I do is I usually set my ISO a little bit higher, maybe even ISO 800, which might seem really high for out here, but when you're shooting at telephoto lengths, you really want that shutter fast so that you get the sharpest image possible. I think when a lot of photographers start out, they get really excited about lighting. And a lot of photographers I find actually overlight situations. If you can, use the natural light that you already have, and I'm really going to try to hit that point throughout this entire shoot. I'm going to take a lot of photographs with natural light, and then I'm also going to strobe them so that you can see the dynamics that change between natural light and lit shots. But I really think you should remember that natural light is the best alternative if you don't have to light something. So when I do my engagement shoots, I really like to use as much natural light as possible. I think it's very easy for photographers to get into a rut thinking that they need to light everything. They need 1, 2, maybe even 3 flashes going off. And I just think for this type of photography, that's not the case. So what I'm going to do is try to shoot as many photographs as I can with natural light. And then if I need just the slightest little pop of artificial light, I'm going to use strobes inside softboxes to give just that extra little punch and bring the exposure up on my subjects. And hopefully by showing you guys a lot of examples of natural light, strobe light, and a good balance between natural and just a tiny pop of flash, you're going to be able to see how you can light your subjects in a way that looks very natural. So we've just moved across the street. We're at this really cool wall, and I'm going to show you guys a really simple pose that you can do when you have a wall or a fence. You can get a couple to lean up against it, and it's just a really good angle when you tilt the camera and get a little of the background into the shot. This is another great example of where I'm just shooting completely natural light and the shots look awesome. And can you guys touch foreheads right there, like? And Jason, I want you to look right here, and then Kristen, I want you to get real close. You can be the flirty one. When you get a great shot like this with natural light, you don't even have to push the envelope anymore. You can just stop right there. There's no extra lighting that I need to do. It looks great and natural, and sometimes that's the best route to go. So now I'm going to set the camera into program mode and just see what the Nikon D300 wants to do automatically without any manual override. And Jason, can you do something with your right hand? Just... Pocket. Yeah, pockets are good. Pockets are cool. You're looking real mysterious there. Like that. So you can see here, it's really underexposing the entire photograph because there's a lot of bright highlights in the background and it's trying to compensate for that. So I see a lot of photographers using direct flash, and I'm not really a big fan. I always think it really dulls the photographs. But we're gonna go ahead and put an on-camera flash on TTL and the camera in program mode just to see what the camera thinks is correct. And let's see if this photo looks any different than the one that I just took completely in manual. Wow, that looks awful. You guys are doing such a good job. So these photos, I mean, they honestly are exposed perfectly, but because the flash is right near the camera, I mean, it looks just like my iPhone photos. It looks just like a point and shoot camera. Everything's really flat, there's no dimension at all. All the beautiful natural light that I saw here in this location to begin with is completely washed out. The picture is exposed correctly, but you just lose all of the flavor of the photograph. And because the images are so washed out when you direct flash, I really rarely ever point the flash directly at my subjects. For this next shot, we're gonna be in the exact same location, but I've moved the couple now into the walkway so they're away from the fence. And I'm going to intentionally underexpose the ambient light. The shot I just did looked really good with all ambient light. But instead, I'm gonna bring the ambient light down and really use a lot of strobe light here. And what I've found is sometimes you're in situations where there's no sunlight at all. It may be very overcast. But when you have really overcast days, it's really great for people's faces, but you lose all contrast in the background. All of a sudden now there's no highlights at all. So I found a way to really add highlights back into photographs. So the way I lit this is pretty unique. I have just a single softbox with one SB800 in the front as a key light, and that is set to an 8th power. And then I've taken the Alien B light and put it way in the background and really turned it up really powerful, and it's acting as a kicker from really far away. So it's almost acting as if the sunlight was way behind the couple, and this is a great little tip that you can use on overcast days when you have no highlights at all. If you can put a speed light or an Einstein really far away, you can light up large areas and give the impression of sunlight. So this image is gonna look very stroby, it's gonna look very different from the natural light that I just took, but it's a nice little trick to have in your back pocket that you can pull out anytime the light's not doing exactly what you need it to do. So for this first shot, I'm now shooting at 2/50th of a second. I'm still at 2.8, but I'm at ISO 250. So I've really killed a lot of the ambient light, and because they're in the shade, this first shot's gonna be really dark. So let's see what the natural shot looks like with no light at all. And so it's, you know, it's super unexposed. There's some sunlight hitting them in patches, and it just looks really bad. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a small softbox to the front, and this is just gonna be one single SB800 at 1/8 power. And I'm going to just use this as a key light to light my subject. So let's see what this shot looks like. So now we have light hitting the couple. They look really good, but the background's just kind of boring. There's not a lot of highlights back there. And this is kind of what it looks like on overcast days a lot of times. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have Lauren turn on the Einstein light, and it's gonna be set to a 4th power, so it's gonna be very bright, but she's gonna be a good 20, 30 feet behind them. And Lauren's light in the very back is gonna be the brightest light in the entire scene, and it's almost acting as if the sun was setting behind the couple, when in fact the sun is behind me. So you can see this shot right here, it's very different from anything else we've taken so far, but it's a nice little thing to just be aware of if you have situations where you have no ambient light in the background and you want to add a nice specular highlight to a very large area. But when you start working with everyday people that are getting married and you're doing these engagement sessions, you have to remember that they're not models, they're not used to posing, and they're going to be super self-conscious about the things that they do with each other. Sometimes you're gonna have couples that are awesome and they make out in front of you and they are clearly in love and everything's great. And then other times you're gonna have couples that they just seem kind of awkward together, and you're really going to have to tell them exactly what to do. And the paradox here is if you pose people too much, your images are going to look very posy, and people usually don't like those type of photographs at all. In fact, they may hire you to take photos that don't look posy. So what I'm going to show you throughout the session is how to pose people in a way that puts them in really good light, puts them in a really great environment, and then you can get them close enough to a pose that through coaching them, you're going to be able to have them interact with each other and get candid moments that appear very natural while you've pretty much put them in the perfect scenario. One great example of this is if you put two people close together and you tell them to do something, chances are they're not going to know what to do. If it was just the two of them, they would have a great time and they'd be very affectionate. But because you're telling them to do this, they're going to be very self-conscious. So what I tell them to do is, hey guys, like, can you do something with your hands? Can you get more physically involved in some way? And all of a sudden, they know what that means without me having to tell them, hey, put your right hand on her left shoulder. And then that may not feel comfortable from their point of view. So you can tell them little things that will get them involved, but don't tell them exactly what to do unless you see something that's just blatantly standing out. And in that case, you can say, hey, I think your right hand looks a little strange. Can you just do something different with it? And a lot of times they will find the correct pose for you. The thing to remember with engagement photos is you want a lot of expression coming out of the subjects in front of your camera. And 9 times out of 10, good smiling and laughing photos are going to be that expression that you want to pull out of them. And if you tell people, hey, can you just start laughing for me or give me big smiles, they're never going to give you genuine emotional interaction. And it's surprising how much people can pick up on that. So it's going to be your job to figure out how you can get that expression out of people. So you're going to need a bag of tricks of things that you tell every client so that they can crack up and have these reactions that you really need them to give you in the photographs. And some of the go-to things that I do is I may say, hey, get real close to each other and I'm so far away, I can't hear what you guys are saying. So whisper little things to each other. And of course, the guy is probably going to start saying things that are probably inappropriate, but she's going to crack up because of it. Or maybe I say, hey, John, how did you land a girl so far out of your league? And then they're going to crack up about it. Or I may say, who is the one who had to make the first initial contact to ask the other person out? And there's going to be some story involved. And when you get people talking about their relationship, you're going to get natural reactions that, you know, you just can't pull out of people by telling them to smile or telling them to laugh. Another technique that I use all the time is I warn my couples, hey, I'm about to tell you to do something really ridiculous, but just roll with it. Let's see how this turns out. And a lot of times I might say, hey, I want you guys to make crazy faces for 5 seconds. And they're gonna make crazy faces, but then after that, they're gonna laugh and have a good time, and I'm gonna capture those moments. I might also say, hey, grab hands, and I want you guys to skip down the road. And they may think, you know, we haven't gone skipping down the road in 20 years. Like, what in the world is Patrick doing? But I'm gonna get those photos, and then immediately after that, I'm gonna get really good reactions because they're gonna be laughing about the activity that I just had them do. So by having my clients go through these little skits and scenarios, I get them to react in ways that they just will not do on command. And you're gonna have to figure this out for yourself. You're gonna have to find ways to break people out, because you're gonna have these couples, they're just kind of awkward together, or maybe they're really introverted. And if you don't tell them anything, you're gonna get photos that look stiff, that are gonna be very unemotional, and they're just not gonna have the vibe that they want. And ultimately, that's why they hired you, because they love the photos that they saw on your website, and you have to deliver that when you shoot with them. So I think one shot that really makes people feel really comfortable is when they can lean against something. It just makes them feel like they're not standing alone trying to pose themselves. So a lot of times I use trees, especially if I'm in a park situation. So I've got Kristen leaning up against a tree, and then I have Jason kind of in front of her looking back towards the camera. And this shot, it's very dark in here, so I've used a lot of ambient light in the background because that's out in direct sunlight. But I'm having to light the couple with a small softbox with one speed light. I think the speed light's set to like an 8th power. So again, very little flash at all. And I'm just balancing the speed light with the ambient light from the background. And then to add a little more drama, I've brought the Einstein in from the side, from behind them. And I think it's set to like a 32nd power, maybe a 1/64th power. So it's just adding just the slightest little kick. And the reason for that is because it's so dark in the park, that one extra light is just gonna help separate them just the slightest bit in a way that still looks very natural. So we're gonna build this shot out really quick for you guys. So I'm gonna take this first shot here, and it's gonna be just the ambient light, and you can see the couple is underexposed and the background is lit pretty well. And now I'm gonna add the softbox from the front, and you can see in this shot, the couple is now lit perfectly. And in this third shot, I'm now gonna add the kicker light from behind, and it's just gonna add the slightest little separation. And once you get to this point, you can really just play around with the framing of the shot. And I'm shooting very telephoto so that I can really bring that tree and the wall in the background right behind them. And it just makes a very studio looking image that you did completely on location, and people really love these type of shots. One thing that I've really noticed shooting in the park a lot is a lot of the light coming out of the trees has a very green cast to it. And a lot of people would think, oh, I can just shoot natural light or maybe even use reflectors, and I can just change the white balance with the magenta setting and fix the green color cast. But what I've found is when you do that, you actually also remove the green cast in the trees, which you may want. So a lot of these shoots that I'm gonna do, I'm going to light my subjects with the slightest little bit of strobe light, because that light is pure white. So by using strobe light, I can compensate for the green tint that is inside the park while still leaving the trees green and not having to adjust the magenta green slider later in post. So as you walk around with your clients, you're gonna find places that just look cool, and you may not be able to pinpoint exactly what it is, but something grabs their attention or something grabs your attention, and you're probably gonna wanna stop and just work that angle and find something that looks really cool. So we were just walking around Charleston and we found this alleyway that had these cool windows with shutters on the outside, and I did an angle where I can kind of see down the wall. And here in a second, I'm gonna just shoot a completely different angle that's more straight on, and you can see how you can get two very different looks just by changing the angle of your camera. So the first shot, I shot at an angle just to kind of get this entire walkway, this entire alley in the frame. And the second shot that I did was just straight on, and I really used the wall kind of as a background, really eliminated all the windows. And because the light was just so low and it's just kind of flat, I had Lauren light with a softbox directly above the camera, and it just added just a little studio flair that just makes really crisp images with an interesting background. So another thing when you're on location and you're using the softbox technique to light your subjects, you really need to be aware of where you're placing the softbox. If you have it too high, you're gonna cast shadows down on people and it's gonna make everyone look very unflattering. If the light's too low, it's gonna give kind of that horror movie look where the light's coming from below, and that never looks good. If it's too low and close to the camera, it's really gonna start to look like direct flash, and even though it's soft light from a softbox, it's still not gonna look that good. And if you're way off to the side, you're gonna drive shadows really at a weird angle from the side that you're lighting from. So you don't wanna do that either. So really slightly off camera, just above their noses, kind of at a 45-degree angle, is what I've found to be the best light, and I know it seems so cliche and boring to light people from that direction, but it looks so good that I would really recommend keeping your light in that general area on the left or the right. And typically what I do is I also put the light closest to the female's face so that if I had to light one or the two, I can give the guy a little more shadow, but then I'm lighting the girl a little more evenly. And that seems to really work well when you can't light both sides of their face evenly. Another thing to remember is you don't want to go too trendy with lighting, because a lot of times these couples, they're hiring you to take very traditional photographs. And if you get too stylized with kicker lights and fill lights and make it too edgy, then, you know, maybe in 10, 15 years, that's going to look very outdated. And people are going to say, why did your engagement photos look, you know, like advertising photos? People really want their images to look very soft, very natural, and have that wedding look to them. The main thing that I keep in the back of my mind when I'm shooting engagement photos is these people are not used to being in front of a camera. They're not models. They probably have had their photo taken very few times, and more than likely, they're super self-conscious. They're thinking, we have to get great photos during this session. So one of the most important skills that you can have as a photographer is just running a photo shoot and giving people confidence, making them feel like everything's going perfectly as planned, and just giving them that extra excitement that's gonna make them feel comfortable in front of your camera. The best way that I've found to make people comfortable is just to simply talk to them. This is usually the first time I've had a chance to hang out with them besides potentially a phone call or a meeting. And I just ask them about the plans that they have for their wedding day. A lot of the things that I'll ask them about are the band that they may hire, perhaps the location they're getting married at, any details that they're gonna have planned for the wedding that I should probably know about as a photographer. And all of a sudden, I can treat them as normal human beings and really open them up so they stop thinking about a photo shoot. I think when I first started shooting engagement photos, the hardest thing for me was to keep a dialogue going with me and my clients while I was scouting out locations and trying to think about the photo shoot itself. And this is a very hard skill set to have, but the more that you do it, the better you're gonna get. The whole idea is just to keep talking and keep throwing things out there that people want to talk about. And usually it's going to be things that they want to talk about. So don't talk about yourself. Really pick their brain and figure out what gets them going. Ask about their jobs. Ask about how they decided to get married in the town that you're working out of. Ask them how they met. Ask them about the family that's traveling down and where they're going to be coming from for the wedding. And all of these little subtopics can really create great conversation, and it's going to make them feel like you're more concerned about them than about the actual photo shoot going on. So in this next example, I've just found a really cool wall that's pure white, and I want to show you 3 different lighting setups that you can do. The first one is just going to be totally natural light. I have a lot of sky here in front of us, so it's just really just a big softbox, a lot of fill, and it just looks really simple, really soft. Second one I'm going to do is I'm going to add the softbox in. So I'm just adding a small light source that's kind of hard, and it's going to just add a little more dramatic lighting and give it kind of that studio look. And then the third setup that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to spin the speed light around and use it bare bulb. And a lot of photographers might say that you can't use hard light to light your subjects, but I find this look to be really cool. It's kind of a fashion look. It still looks very natural. It's not too outrageous, but it just adds a little drama that's not there with soft light or with natural light. So as you go throughout an engagement session, you probably want to get a lot of different looks. You probably want the couple walking, you may want them up against a wall, you may want them interacting with each other just in open area, and you probably want them sitting as well. So we found this cool little area that's got a lot of rustic bricks. It's just down here on Church Street in Charleston. So I just set them down in an area that just would look really natural for them to be. And when I took the first natural light shot, I could tell that there just wasn't any dramatic light to really make this photograph look the way that I envisioned it in my mind. So I set the ambient light really low, and you can see that test shot here. And then I had Lauren, again, with the same softbox on a stick setup. She just popped a little bit of light as the key light from the front, and you can see that photograph here. And then looking at the length of this building, I really thought, man, if I could put one more light just backlighting the side brick here, it would really make this image come together. So I had Nick go out a little bit further down the road and backlight the entire wall with the Einstein. And because the Einstein's so powerful, he had to only be at 1/32nd power to get the look that I wanted. So again, 2 light setup, very simple. And the reason I really had to light it this way was because it's getting dark and I'm just really running out of light. So you can easily do really cool photo shoots even when the sun has set if you have 1 or 2 lights available. So it's the very end of the day, the sun has set, we pretty much have no light out here, but it's super dramatic. In Charleston, we have these awesome clouds here on the Battery, and I know it's gonna make for a really good photograph, but right now it looks really bright because we have the shutter really slow on the camera. So I'm gonna have Lee expose correctly for the sky now and increase the shutter. And you can see I am pitch black. So we're definitely gonna have to light the shot. And so here's the first shot I would take if I tried to even come close to exposing for the couple, and you can see the background's pure white. And if I expose correctly for the sky, they're gonna be completely black. So this is one of those examples where you can't just shoot natural light, you can't use a reflector, you're going to have to light your subjects to get dramatic shots in this situation. So this first shot here, I'm just doing, again, the softbox from the front. It's a Speedlight, an SB800. I think we have this set to an 8th power, maybe even a 16th power. And shots look really cool, very dramatic. I got the couple up on the Battery with the dramatic skies in the background. And for this next shot, I'm just gonna add one more kicker from behind them. This is the Einstein set to probably the lowest power, maybe 1/28 or 1/32. And it's just gonna light them from the back and just give a little more drama to the photograph. So if you want to really do some flashy images, I would suggest doing those towards the end of your shoot when the light really settles down, because there's really not a lot of options you have anyway. And you're going to get that great wow factor with dramatic skies and kicker lights, and you can really go crazy with this. But initially when I shoot throughout the day, I try to really tone it down and use 1 light, if not natural light, and start bringing in the kicker light in a 2 light setup towards the end of the photo shoot.
So guys, once you have pictures, you've got to put them together into some sort of portfolio. And in today's internet age, of course, the way you're going to do that is with a website. Everybody's got to have a website. And in my opinion, your website is probably the most important thing when it comes to your perceived value and when it comes to actually booking jobs. So many times your clients are going to come to your website, they're going to have never heard of you before, they're not going to have any idea what good photography or bad photography is, and you instantly have to make some sort of connection with them and make them, at the very least, bookmark your webpage so that they say, you know what, that was kind of interesting, I want to come back. My hope is that when my clients come to my website, they instantly decide, this is the guy I want to book. This is the really interesting thing about wedding photography that's very different from fashion photography or commercial photography. If you want to get into commercial photography or fashion or any of these other types of photography that might show up in books or magazines or in ads, you're going to be dealing with a very educated art buyer. This means that this person, for their living, goes out and finds photographers to do jobs that they are going to be hiring you to do. They do this day in and day out, and they know exactly what good photography is, and they know the big names. Chances are, if you want to get into fashion photography, there's absolutely no way you're going to be able to go to Victoria's Secret because they've already got Russell James, and he's been their photographer for years now, and he's doing a fantastic job. They're never going to choose you as their photographer. The interesting thing about weddings, though, is that if one of these brides comes to your website who has never booked a photographer before, has very little idea what good photography is, and you can give her some sort of emotional connection to your pictures, you're going to make the sale very easily over somebody who's been doing this for 20 years. All of a sudden, other wedding photographers who have been doing this for 20, 30 years have no advantage over you because name's not important. Wedding photographers typically are not known outside of the wedding photography community, so it's not like these brides have heard of wedding photographers before in many cases. And if your website is designed well enough, and your pictures of course have to be good, if they're good enough though, you're going to be able to book jobs over people that have been doing this for years and years and years. You would never be able to do this in the commercial industry. I tried to go directly to big magazines and to big corporations and say, hey, you guys should hire me. I think I have this really good ad campaign. And they go, who the hell are you? Why are we even talking to you? You know, we work with these 10 photographers. We have been for the last 15 years. You're some young kid out of college. We don't even want to talk to you. But with wedding photography, you can basically start at the top. All you have to do is have great marketing, and that really comes down to what your website looks like.
I know when I started shooting, I thought the quality of a photographer was based only on his images, and it really took me a long time to understand what brides were looking for when they were looking to book their own photographer. And it really has little to do with the quality of photography itself. It really has much more to do about the emotion and the perception a bride has towards your work. And surprisingly, it's just not about the images themselves. It's about the people in the images. It's about the way that you lay it out on your website. It's about the music, about the font, about the style. And so when you put all of this together, you're really trying to create an emotional atmosphere that's gonna let your potential client feel like you're the guy to book because she gets a feeling when she looks at your website. So we're going to talk a lot about pricing your work in another chapter, and this kind of goes hand in hand with how you are perceived with your brides. But your website is going to be the first place that you can really make that impression and that you can give that perceived value to your work. So what exactly happens when a bride starts Googling photographers and looking for somebody to book for her own wedding? She's going to go to a bunch of different websites, and she's not going to have any idea of what the price is and what distinguishes each photographer from one another. So if she goes to your website and then she goes to another photographer who might charge $15,000 or $20,000, you really want it to be your goal for her not to be able to distinguish your work based on price alone. And that means your site has to be as stylish, as contemporary, as clean, as modern as any other photographer's site out there. You don't want for 1 second for her to look at your site and say, something's not right here, perhaps this photographer isn't worth my money. And that's an extremely hard thing for us to understand as photographers, because a lot of us, one, we've never been married, or if we have been married, we didn't deal with the booking process. Two, we're not graphic designers, so we don't really look at the design of our website that much. And three, because we're photographers, we want to think it's all about the photography. And the reality is, photography has very little to do with the overall perception of your business.
So let's talk about perceived value a little bit more. Ladies, we'll start with you first. When you get married one day, or when you were married already, how would it make you feel if your husband got you a fake wedding ring? It looks the exact same, and that's all wedding rings are supposed to do. They're just supposed to look pretty. So if it looks the exact same, why would that upset you? It's perceived value. You don't need to actually do anything with a ring. It has absolutely no value, but it's perceived value. You feel like if a lot of money was spent on that, then it must be worth it, right? The same thing goes for wedding photography. Fellas, we like to think about maybe watches. Why would we pay $10,000 for a Rolex watch and then we would be embarrassed to wear a Timex watch? They both tell time. Maybe even the Timex watch might even be a little bit more reliable. It would have a movement that's not going to break down quite as much, or doesn't cost $1,000 to have it repaired every few years. But we would still prefer to wear the Rolex watch and deal with all that, pay the extra money, deal with all the headaches of having it repaired all the time. It's perceived value. We feel like the brand name of Rolex is worth something, and when we wear this, we're proud of it. It's the same thing with women in jewelry, or if we buy a sports car. Why would we buy a sports car that can go 200 miles an hour and then never drive it over 80 miles an hour? Perceived value again. We don't need it, there's absolutely no reason for it, but we feel like it's worth more, so then it is worth more. And that's really what you need to tap into as a wedding photographer. If you can make people believe that your work is worth more, all of a sudden you'll easily be able to charge much more for it. So a lot of photographers, when they're first getting started, they're going to have a website, whether it's Flickr or even if it is a good looking template website, but it's going to have every type of picture they've ever taken, whether it's their cat, it's going to be their friends, it's going to be landscapes, it's going to be their attempts at fashion, which of course never looks like real fashion. And then they decide, hey, I want to get into weddings, so they start putting wedding pictures on this website. That is the worst decision, okay? If you're looking to buy a house, are you going to go to a realtor that also sells used cars? Of course not. If you're going to be paying somebody that much money, especially when it comes to something as important as wedding photography, you want them to be a full-time wedding photographer. That does not mean that you have to be a full-time wedding photographer, but you at least need to market yourself as a full-time wedding photographer. So whether you have a website right now or not, it is very important that you create a website that is only wedding photography. Chances are you are going to shoot other things. You're going to get paid to do portraits. You may get paid for commercial jobs here and there, but I would suggest keeping everything separate. I definitely do commercial jobs. I mean, I run f-stoppers, but everything is totally separate. I have rlmorris.com, which is my commercial website that has a range of different pictures, and honestly, I don't make that much money from that website at all. And then I have RL Morris Weddings, which is only wedding photography, and when people go to that website, they realize, okay, this is what this guy does very, very seriously. I know I'm going to hire a professional if I hire this
guy. Once you've got enough photos to create a good portfolio on a website, the first thing you're going to need to do is decide on your business name. Most people choose their full name, like Patrick Hall Weddings, but you may want to consider having something more generic in case you ever decide to sell your business. It's going to be near impossible for me to ever sell Patrick Hall Weddings to somebody else because I've branded it as me. But with Charleston Wedding Photography, that business name is a lot more generic and people can use that after I'm done with it. The reason that I branded my website and company as Patrick Hall Weddings was because I really wanted to sell myself. I didn't want to be some huge company that had this impersonal feel. And at the end of the day, I felt like I could essentially charge more money because it was Patrick Hall and not Charleston Wedding Photography. But say I'm booked on July 4th and somebody is looking at Patrick Hall Weddings, there's really no way that I can have my assistant shoot that wedding because my client's going to want me to shoot it. But if my business name was Charleston Wedding Photography, I might be able to actually book a second wedding on the same day and have someone else that I trust shoot the wedding under my business name. And all of a sudden my clients now, they're not shocked that Patrick Hall's not showing up to the wedding because they think they've booked Charleston Wedding Photography and everyone associated with that company is capable of doing really good work. To really simplify things, I think if you want to shoot less weddings at a higher price point, even down the road, it's going to be better for you to market yourself as your first and last name. People are really going to associate your business with you and see you as an artist, and because of that, you can charge a lot more down the road when you decide to raise your prices up. If your business plan is to shoot as many weddings as possible and perhaps be at a lower price point, I think it's really important to then have a more generic name, kind of a business name, because then you can have multiple photographers working and you can book multiple weddings on the same day. One thing to also consider is if you go with the generic name like Charleston Wedding Photography, you can still brand yourself within that business. So I could say that I'm Patrick Hall and I own Charleston Wedding Photography, and maybe that might make the most sense because I'm allowed to both brand myself, but I'm also able to have an awesome name like Charleston Wedding Photography, which is going to come in very handy both in brand recognition and also in Google SEO. So don't underestimate the fact that you can combine the two into one, but you really need to think these things through before you jump in and buy all your domain names and start branding your website.
So if you are going to name your business something generic like Charleston Wedding Photography, keep in mind that Google SEO is really important. And in my case, I actually do own charlestonweddingphotography.com. I think that's a good business name, but it's only good here in Charleston. If you created a wedding business called Red Shoes Photography, that could be good in multiple markets, but it's never going to come up on Google for Charleston Wedding Photography if that's your market. So it's something definitely to think about. If you plan on traveling around a lot, then you may want to name your business one after you or a generic name that's not affiliated with any sort of location. But if you plan on staying in one location, and maybe you want to sell your business later and getting to the top of Google is very important to you, then you may want to consider using terms that work with Google so that you will come up when brides search specific keywords. So try to imagine what your clients might be typing into Google, and is it important that your business comes up first on Google? Because chances are, if you use a very generic name for your business and it's not related to wedding photography or the area that you're in, you're gonna have a hard time winning the SEO game in terms of organic clicks in Google. Maybe that's important to you, maybe it's not, but it's definitely worth considering.
So once you decide on a business name, you're probably never going to change that name down the road. So it's really important that you think this through and feel very comfortable and confident about the name and brand that you choose for both your company and your website. So once you have an idea for your business name, you really need to check to see that that domain name is available. The last thing that you want is for your business name to be different in any way from your URL name. That's going to make it very confusing for your clients to land on your site, or even worse, they may be redirected to a site that's not associated with you at all. So I would recommend going to a site like GoDaddy.com and typing in different URL names that match your business name to make sure that you can actually purchase that URL for your website. It's really important to get a good jump start on this, and I know a lot of URLs have already been bought because the internet's kind of flourished in the last 15 years, but once you have that business name, you need to really quickly buy that URL and hold on to it. I remember when I first started my business, I wanted patrickhall.com or I wanted patrickhallphotography.com, and I quickly realized that there was several other Patrick Halls out there in the World Wide Web, and those names were already taken. So I bought patrickhall.com, and I had to buy patrickhallweddings.com. And so I realized the weddings URL was very valuable because it had my name and a very important keyword, weddings, directly in the URL. But for you, you might be able to get your full name, you might be able to get your full name with photography, and you may choose to go with the weddings route as well. So the whole idea is just to think of a very concise URL name that fits your business and is very simple for your clients to remember. So you really need to go to GoDaddy.com, check the availability of your URL, and just go ahead and buy it. It's extremely cheap, it's easy to do, it takes 10 minutes to do max. And once you have that locked down, you can start working on getting your website associated with your URL and getting your website up and running. When you first get started, you're probably going to want to buy a wedding template from a company that just makes nothing but wedding templates for photographers. And one of the best places to look is at CMD, Creative Motion Design. The reason I really like CreativeMotionDesign.com is they make websites that are HTML5 and they're super affordable, they're very clean, they're extremely easy to update. And I know that every person landing on my website is able to see my site because it's HTML and it's able to load on all mobile devices. One of the reasons I really recommend CMD is because they make websites that are both Flash-based but also HTML5. And when I bought my first 2 websites, they were completely Flash. I thought that was the way to go because they were exciting, they were clean, everything moved around the website. But then I realized once the iPhone and iPads came out that Apple wouldn't allow these Flash sites to display at all. And CMD does a very good job of giving you both options. And at this point, I would almost encourage just going completely HTML because then you know that anybody landing on your website is able to view it on any device, including portable handheld devices. Another thing that's really good about HTML sites is Google is able to crawl through them a lot better than Flash sites. So if you start making custom pages or you start really getting into search engine optimization, it's going to be a whole lot easier for you to brand specific pages that will get picked up by Google that your clients will be able to search for down the road. A lot of times when you have a Flash site, it's all embedded into one site and nothing really gets picked up as much through Google. So these are things to think about when you first get started because once you have a website in place, it's going to be near impossible to change that without going in a completely opposite direction. While we're talking about websites, I think it's also really important to talk about running a blog. And I get a lot of questions from photographers asking, well, should I just run a blog and have that become my website? Or do I even need a blog? Maybe I will just have my show album on my website. Maybe I'll just have my website as kind of my portal just for all my clients and not run a blog. I think it's really important to have both, and here's why. I think you really want your website to be super concise and have the absolute best images possible from your portfolio. You want your clients to go there and you want them to be sold instantly. You want it simple, you want them to have a very easy way to contact you, and sometimes a blog can be so complicated because you're posting so often that your clients just aren't going to see the best work all the time. They're going to see your most current work. So I think there is a place for both, and the reason the blog's really important is because it's going to help you really grab the attention of Google when you do search engine optimization. It's also a great way for you to share pictures from every wedding if your clients want to link back to your blog. And it also allows your clients to know that you're an active professional who's working every day and posting new material up on the website. If you're considering getting a blog, you may want to check out Creative Motion Design because they have blogs that look exactly like their website template. So your blog is going to look identical. If people go from your website to your blog or your blog to your website, they're going to feel like they're on the same place. So I think that's really important. But you also may want to check out ProPhotoBlogs.com. They make website templates for WordPress, and they will actually install all of that on your server for about $300. And that's the first blog that I had, and it's also the blog that we started with fstoppers.com. So I can't speak highly enough of those guys, and they make it very easy to get your blog up and running.
So the great thing about owning your own business is that you get to decide what's important to you. And if you hate doing something, you don't have to do it. One thing that I absolutely hate doing is running a blog. And therefore, you'll notice that I don't have any sort of blog for my wedding website. I think that that's a really bad decision, honestly, and I think I could book a lot more brides if I did have a blog, but I hate the idea of having to write little articles and put pictures up after every single wedding, so I've decided to just not deal with that at all. It's up to you. If you're just getting started though, I would suggest starting a blog. It will help you with SEO, it'll help you book more clients, and then later down the road, if you get tired of it, then you could stop.
A really important thing to remember when you're first designing your website is kind of the idea of branding your business. And when you start looking at a lot of photographers' websites, you'll notice that some of them go in very interesting directions. Some might be a very vintage look. They're going to have a lot of Instagram looks, and it's going to have this artsy vibe to it. Others might go in a direction that's very cutesy. You know, they may have little notes and flowers and jewelry and things that are very representative of weddings, and it kind of gives this vibe of, you know, kind of being carefree and all about wedding photography. Others might go in a very modern direction or a very elegant direction. So you really need to think about what's important to you and kind of the overall brand that you want to give your website. So back when I was deciding what I wanted my website to look like, I really spent a lot of time looking at other photographers' websites. I had absolutely no idea what a photography site should look like, let alone a professional wedding website. So I looked at all the competition in my area. I went to some of the highest end wedding photographers around the country, and it became very clear to me that I needed my website to be very clean, very concise. Little things like the font that I would put on my website, or the first image that would show up, or the logo that I would use for my own business were extremely important. Those websites that had horrible fonts, really bad first images, and really bad logos, I could instantly tell something wasn't right, and perhaps this photographer was either new, or they were not very confident, or, you know, their prices were going to be very low. And I instantly got this impression that my website needs to look a very specific way, and I really got that by looking at a lot of other photographers' websites in my area and nationwide.
One thing to think about when you're picking out a website is how big the images will be displayed. Make sure that you look at the website on multiple monitors because you don't want your pictures to be full screen, in my opinion. The first website I bought showed everything in full screen, and the problem with that was great looking images, when they're smaller, all of a sudden don't look quite as good when they're full screen. And if you can sit back and look at an image for a few seconds full screen, you can see every little detail of that image and every little mistake, and it just became an editing nightmare. I would much rather have my images slightly smaller, fit to a normal size monitor, and that way they can go through images without being sidetracked by every little detail of that image. You know, with commercial photography, we have tons of time to make a single image perfect. And so for that type of thing, maybe full screen would be better. But when it comes to wedding photography, you're going to take thousands of pictures. You can't make every image flawless. And even with all the photoshopping in the world, you're not going to be able to make every single person in that picture look perfect. So I would suggest picking a website that's going to display your images slightly smaller. And that way your eyes aren't going to wander to all of the little details and all of the little mistakes on the images. You're just going to see the image for what it is and move on to the next shot. One thing that goes hand in hand with your business is your logo. And I feel like your logo needs to match the design of your website. So if you have some sort of classic logo, then your website needs to be classic. You can't have like a cute modern website and then some very traditional logo. It just won't match very well. So you need to keep in mind when you're starting your whole business, what is your business name going to be? What is your website going to look like? And then how is your logo going to fit in within that? Now, a lot of photographers might say, you know, I can just create my own logo. All I have to do is go in Photoshop and grab a font. And sometimes that actually does work. I'm never going to say that, you know, that doesn't work. But if there was ever a time to spend a little bit extra money, I think spending it on your logo is a great decision. This is my logo, and it took me a long time to get this logo. I think I went without having a mark, is what it's called, for probably the first 4 years of my business. I just used a font in Photoshop, and I ended up going to a graphic designer because I was so bad at creating my own logo. I found somebody that was a professional, and I think I spent close to $3,000 on this logo. And you might say, Lee, you're out of your mind. How can you spend that much money on that? But I've got to tell you, I'm so proud of this logo. I'm going to keep it for the rest of my career. And every time people see it and they see that, oh man, there's an R and an L and an M in that thing, that is a really clever, elegant looking logo, I am once again glad that I spent a little bit of money, got something that I'm never going to regret and I'm never going to have to redo. So if you yourself aren't great at graphic design, keep in mind I actually went to school for graphic design and I still wasn't good enough to come up with a good logo that I was happy with. Save up your money, go to a professional and get something made that you're going to be really proud of, because it's going to make your website stand out, and everything that you stamp it on, whether it's your business card or your letterhead, it's going to look that much more professional. All right, so you've got your website picked out. Probably by now you've come up with a business name and you've got a logo made. It's time to figure out what pictures are going to make it onto your website, what pictures are going to be in your portfolio, and what pictures are going to sell your business. It seems like this would be really easy. You just pick your favorite pictures and put them online and then people start booking you, but it's not quite that easy for a lot of photographers, because the problem is we think like photographers. We think that if we used an expensive camera, or if we used a lot of lighting, or if it was a really difficult shot to capture, then that shot must be good. And at the beginning of your career, it's going to be very difficult for you to look past the technical side of shooting to just look at the image like a standard bride or potential client would.
Such an important part of being a photographer that's not always talked about is editing your work. And I don't mean editing in terms of photoshopping, I just mean editing by the images that you keep and delete. And I see so many websites where there's amazing images on their site, but it seems like the photo was taken a split second before the perfect moment. Either a couple's going in for a kiss, but they're at that awkward stage where they actually haven't kissed yet, or maybe it's a split second after the perfect reaction, and therefore the facial expressions that the people have in the image are just off a little bit. I think it's so important for you to recognize that as a photographer and to make sure that you don't have images on your website and in your portfolio that convey some sort of awkward moment between your couple, because your potential clients are going to think, is this photographer going to give me these awkward photos where I don't look comfortable, and I don't want my friends seeing me in that kind of atmosphere. So make sure you delete those pictures and get them off your site. Anything that looks slightly awkward or uncomfortable, that needs to go into the trash can, and you really need to pull out the best moments from your photo shoots and put those online.
It's funny, I was asked a year or so ago by a friend of mine, gosh, Lee, do you only shoot models' weddings? Everybody on your website is so pretty. And I said, well, no, that's not the case, but those are the only people that will ever make it to my website. And it's not that I'm some terrible person and I only want to deal with pretty people. It's just marketing. And when you think about any sort of company that's marketing anything, they're only going to put their best foot forward. And the issue with wedding photography that a lot of photographers don't understand is that if anything in their picture is offensive, whether it's the person is offensive, the clothing that they're wearing is offensive, the decorations are offensive, if anything like that is offensive to somebody looking at the picture, they are not going to see the picture anymore. They're just going to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's wearing that. How did she get him? Oh man, who would use those two colors together? Oh my gosh. And it took me a long time to get over that because I would work so hard on these pictures and I would be so proud of them. And then I would hear these brides over and over again just rag on them when I showed them in person. So at that point, I started to realize I need to start thinking like a bride, putting only my best work on my website. And when you're first getting started, it's going to be tough to come up with good work because when you first start out, your wedding prices are going to be incredibly cheap. You're going to book incredibly cheap weddings, and with cheap weddings comes everything that's cheap, including the dress, the cake's going to be cheap, the bouquet is going to be cheap, the decorations are going to be cheap, the venue's going to be cheap, and in many cases, the clients aren't going to be as attractive as they are when you start charging much more money down the road. So you might end a wedding and leave with nothing that you can put on your website. And it's really hard to deal with that, but I would suggest keeping those pictures off your website as long as you can and using as few pictures as you can from the weddings that you actually are proud of and the weddings that you're trying to book in the future. I get booked occasionally at crazy venues like a Shriners Club or something, and it looks like I'm shooting in some middle school. Nothing about it is romantic, nothing about it is beautiful, and there's no way I'm going to put that on my website. I'm more than happy to shoot the wedding, and I think that it's still a beautiful, meaningful day for the client. But in terms of marketing my business, that's the worst thing I could do because that wedding looks cheap, therefore it would make my pictures look cheap. So I always say put your best foot forward with your photography, but also with the subjects in your picture. And you know, if you shoot a pretty picture of a bouquet, but that bouquet looks rough and maybe it's wilting or it just looks cheap and there's not many nice flowers in it, your clients are going to pick up on that and they're going to go, man, that looks like they just picked it out of a garden on the side of the road. Where's the real bouquet? And so you need to start thinking like the type of client that you're marketing to and try to give them pictures that they will envision their own wedding looking like. That's how you're going to book clients. So when you're first getting started, you're going to try your hardest to get decent pictures on your website. And if you're going to shoot these super cheap weddings and you walk away with nothing that's website worthy, you're going to say, man, I'm just going to do anything I can to get pretty pictures on my site. And one thing that's becoming really popular these days are what's called shootouts, where 30 photographers go out and you hire like 2 or 3 models to act like a bride and groom, and everybody's taking pictures of them in the exact same location. And then what happens next week, 30 wedding photographers in your area have the exact same couple on their website. And you have all of these mediocre looking people on your website, and then all of a sudden you have this one smoking hot couple that looks like they're straight out of a magazine. It just doesn't look real at all. So if you do need to get pictures, you can hire models. It is possible to do, but I would highly suggest not putting the exact same couples that other photographers have gotten from the exact same shootout. Go out, get your own people to do photo shoots with, and just be prepared to deal with it because you'd be surprised how often clients can pick up on it, and they will ask you, is this a real couple? Because something doesn't seem quite right here. They don't look that into each other, or they look like models. They look like they're posing. Why are they acting like that? And you're gonna have to answer them, and at that point decide if you wanna lie and just say, yeah, it's a real couple, or if you need to tell them the truth, and that's going to be really embarrassing to say, yes, I hired them to take fake wedding pictures. So just plan on dealing with that because it's something you're going to have to deal with eventually. So when you're picking out the pictures for your website, remember that you need the full range of wedding day images, from everybody getting ready to pose pictures, dancing pictures, detail shots of the cakes, the rings, flowers, the ceremony, every aspect of a wedding day. And I would suggest grabbing the best shots from multiple weddings and putting them all into one category. Once you get a lot of pictures, you can split up your website into preparation, ceremony, pose, stuff like that. But if you don't have that many pictures at the beginning of your career, I would suggest just using a favorites folder. I actually still have a favorites folder on my website. I don't have anything split up at this point. And that way people can see your best work. They can get the idea of what every aspect of their wedding day might look like, but they're not having to see one couple's full wedding day. When you get your website up and running, you may consider putting music in the background so that when people come to your website, music starts playing, it gives you a little background music to enjoy the pictures by. And some photographers say they hate it, some say they love it. I don't think it really matters, but keep a few things in mind. First of all, you don't want any music that's so trendy that you could have somebody have a completely negative response to it. You may have some brides that love the new Miley Cyrus song, but then you might have a few brides that absolutely despise Miley Cyrus. So if they come to your website and their most hated song comes on right off the bat, you're gonna probably lose them as a potential client simply because of a song. At that point, I would suggest using a song that's a little bit less trendy, maybe a little bit more classic, or no song at all. If you do put a song on your website, go to a website like songfreedom.com and you can license that song legally. It's only $25, and that way you won't have any scares with getting sued by the music industry, because honestly, a few photographers recently have been sued, and you don't want that to happen to you. So one of the most important things that I do when it comes to marketing is creating slideshows. And after every wedding, I create about a 5-minute slideshow. I'll put it online, give the link to the bride and groom, and then I will let them share it. And basically, they do all the work for me. The great thing about slideshows is, though, it shows only your best work, it shows full weddings, and it puts everything to the beat of very emotional music. You'll find that if you look at the same picture with goofy music, it makes the images look goofy. If you look at the same image with really epic emotional music, it's gonna make you feel epic and emotional. So using that on your website can be very, very valuable. I suggest that you use the portfolio section of your website to have your best pictures and not show full weddings at all. And then also have another section of your website that has some of your best slideshows. That way, if any of your clients say, hey, it looks like on your website you're only showing your best work, why can't I see any full weddings? You can say, oh, go to the slideshow section and you can see 5 or 6 of my best weddings. And at this point, let's say the pictures aren't quite as good as something that you might show in your normal portfolio. That's okay, because the pictures are gonna be small in this video and they're only gonna be showing up for a split second. So clients really aren't going to have much time to focus in on each image and really critique it like they would on the images that are still on your website. So as photographers, we all would love to believe that if you're successful, it's just because you're a great photographer and you take pretty pictures and therefore people wanna pay you more money for those pictures. I hate to say it, but that's not true at all. In my opinion, I think probably 20% of the reason why I'm booked is because of my pictures. The other 80% is the way people feel about me personally, the way people feel when they see my website, the way people feel when they see my intro video on my website, and all of the information that I give. If one of these potential clients sees a slideshow and it makes her tear up or even cry, that's what's gonna book you a wedding. The fact that they say, oh, there's some good photography there, that means nothing. There's so many great photographers out there. So what are you going to do to make your website and your work stand out? Hopefully, throughout this entire DVD, you're gonna learn and you're gonna figure out how to create an incredible presentation for your work so that when people see it, they cannot forget it. So here in the Charleston market, I realized that I was getting booked by a lot of clients that were outside of the state, flying in for a destination wedding here in Charleston. And meeting with me a lot of times was very, very difficult because I'm constantly up in New York doing other projects, or the weekend that these clients came down to book other vendors, maybe I was shooting a wedding elsewhere. And so meeting with these people became very, very difficult. And what I decided to do was create a video at the beginning of my website that explained a little bit about me. It shows some of my pictures. It gives these clients the ability to see what my personality is like without actually having to meet me in person. So the great thing about having this promo video at the beginning of my website is each of these potential clients kind of feels like they've had a meeting with me even when they haven't. And so I've found that maybe 50 or 60% of my current weddings, I don't get the chance to meet with people before the day of their wedding. And in most cases, clients would feel really uncomfortable about that. They may not even want to book me at all because they've never met me in person, but because they've seen this video about me and I'm talking and I'm looking directly at them, they feel like I'm a real person. They feel much more comfortable booking me directly over the phone or via email. So when you first buy your website, you may not think that you need videos, or you may not need to be able to embed slideshows, but chances are very, very soon you are going to need to be able to do that. So I would definitely suggest getting a website that allows you to embed videos so that in the future you're not going to have to completely change websites, you can just add to it.